microbiome students. Let's talk about fungi, but in the more medical sense. Please follow along. You can use your study guide and take notes as I go over things if you would like. Remember, I'm allowing you to use your notes on your exam, so please be very thorough in your notes, but also make sure you understand the material. Because you want to be able to take the test without fumbling through your notes the whole time. Okay, so yes, they're helpful, but also it's even more helpful if you already understand the material. You're not going to be wasting your time as much. So let's go ahead and get into it. All of this information can be found in your textbook, and let's get started. So fungi are everywhere. They're in all environments, and they're even on ourselves. And so there are over 100,000 different types of fungal species, or different fungal species. And usually these different fungal species are known to be pathogens to plants, and there are bunches and bunches of plant pathogens. But for today, we're looking at pathogens of animals, right? And so of those, it's a smaller bunch. It's only around 300 species that are actually linked to causing animal disease. And so what do we call this disease when it's caused by a fungi? It's called a mycosis. Mycoses are plural, is plural of the word. And what is a pathogen? Well, a pathogen is just a disease-causing agent or organism. And so today we're going to be looking at two types of pathogens, and one is a true pathogen, which is a pathogen, right, that can grow and invade comfortably inside a host, whether or not the host is healthy or whether or not they have a comprised immune system. Okay, so they're going to be able to thrive in your body whether or not you see any kind of outright symptoms. However, they're still able to invade and cause an infection. Opportunistic pathogens, however, these don't usually invade the host if they're healthy. Your immune system will take care of them. However, if you have a compromised immune system due to a pre-existing medical condition, then they can take advantage of that and cause an infection. So that's an opportunist pathogen. So, thinking about fungi, right? You're not never, but you usually don't see them out in high temperature environments. They typically can't survive that. They're going to be at cooler temperatures that are a little cooler, around the 80-degree kind of environment. However, we are warm-blooded animals, right? We have a naturally high body temperature, and we have a low availability of O2, right? When we compare it to the atmosphere, right? And so this makes our bodies uninhabitable for some microscopic organisms, okay? So, how are we able to get some that live in our bodies? How are we even able to get them to inhabit us if, we aren't the ideal? And so this can be explained by a process known as thermal dimorphism. So this is basically a characteristic that some microorganisms or fungi exhibit, right? And so this is when they switch between that mold phase and that yeast phase that we had talked about previously, okay? And so just to kind of show you what's going on, okay, so I want you to look at this diagram. You can feel free to pause, but I'm going to go through it with you. And so, out in the everyday environment, right, our fungi are going to be in a hyphal state, right, a hyphal form, meaning they're multicellular, they're out in the open, they're just kind of able to eat nutrients from their environment, right? Because as we know, um, all fungi are heterotrophs, okay? And so usually fungi are saprophobic, right? And this just means that they're free living and just feeding on whatever. However, right, they can enter our body through the form of a spore, right? And these are produced from the mycelium, right? And we learned about the different kinds of spores that you can get in lab. But basically, what happens is, right, once they enter the body, the temperature's greatly increased. And compared to the atmosphere, right, oxygen is really reduced and there's less nutrients. And so what happens is that spore will basically germinate into a yeast and it will become a yeast. And this is how they will stay when in our bodies. They'll be in this yeast form. And so they can form colonies and they can reproduce by making a bunch of endospores or through budding. Okay? However, they can exit our body, and once that happens, you basically have a decrease in the temperature, right? The outside world's a lot cooler than us. And basically, right, they're getting more O2, improved nutrients, so they're able to go back to this larger type of body and then start making these spores. But basically, this is what thermal dimorphism means. You know, thermal meaning temperature, right? Di meaning two. Morph is just the form we're looking at, right? So temperature, two forms, uh, based on that difference in temperature. Okay, and then you can read more about this on figure 22.1, and that should be around page 709. Okay, and so we're going to be talking a lot about pathogenesis, and so just giving you a little definition, but it's just the process by which a disease or a disorder can develop. And so, in general, right, fungi can enter the body through different routes. And so they can enter through our respiratory tract. And so, as we had seen before, that's in the form of spores, right? However, they can also enter through trauma of the epidermis. And so that would be that they're entering through a wound that is caused in your body, right? That's what trauma means, right? There was some kind of wound and they enter into the subcutaneous layer of our skin. And then we can also just have contamination of skin surface. So this could be at the cutaneous and superficial layer. And so this could just be that your skin is coming into contact with some contaminated areas with this fungi. Okay. And so just so that we can get a picture of that, right? So either through your respiratory system or, right, you could have some kind of trauma that happens to your skin and it goes in all the way down, and this is known as the subcutaneous layer, right? But with ones that are more of at the surface level, right, this would be called superficial. And then a little bit deeper under that is the cutaneous. And so when you come into contact with these contaminants, right, these different little fungi in your environment, it won't go that deep if it's affecting your skin like that. Okay. Another thing you're going to hear throughout today is virulence. And so what is that? That's just the severity, okay, or harmfulness of a pathogen, right? And its ability to invade a host. And so this can be determined by a number of factors. So it can be caused by, you know, they can be more virulent if they're able to survive a little better. And so if they have that thermal dimorphism, they can become more virulent. Okay? And so then the overall immunity of the host, as we had described before, right? So how badly this pathogen can invade a host and how severe the illness can become is dependent on how well that immune system of your host is. And then we're also going to say the morphology. affects the overall ability of the pathogen to be more virulent because some fungi can have cell walls that are covered in antigens, right? And it allows them to adhere to different host cells. And so when that happens, right, they don't get phagocytized, right? And they're not immediately flagged by the immune system that they're there. And so it can prevent it from, getting phagocytized by a white blood cell or a phage, but it can also prevent inflammation from the host's immune system, and inflammation helps to fight off different diseases. So basically, if they have these outside structures on them, they're a little bit better equipped to survive. So these different things help them to basically, um, you know, cause more harm to the host. And so you're also going to hear this term. It's called a systemic infection. And so this occurs throughout the whole body. A systemic infection, right, is basically an infection that became so so harmful that it was able to go and invade into other organs and other body systems um, through your circulation system, right? It's just going to spread. So systemic infection, think of it, it's just spreading to different systems, to different organs, okay? And so before we get too deep into thinking about these different microfungi, right? Let's just kind of remember the different groups of the fungi. And we had briefly touched on this in chapter 5, but just kind of want you to think about this, right? And so we've got the zygomycetes. They're in the phylum Zygomycota, and these have spores that are produced in a sporangia, right? They're asexual or sexual. And so those are what we have. They produce a zygospore, as we had seen in lab. Then we have our ascomycetes, right? These are in the Ascomycota phylum. And so these can also be unicellular or multicellular, okay? And so they do have divided hyphae. So we call those divisions septa, right? And when we see it, we say that that is a septate um, um, fungi, right? Zygomycetes will not have those septa. Also, their spores are produced inside of a sac. Okay, it's called the ascus, and so it's Ascomycota. Okay, and then their spores can be asexual or sexual, right? Then we have our basidiomycetes in Basidiomycota. Okay, and so they also have divided septa. Divided hyphae with septa, right? And so they produce spores that look like a club, right? And so that's basidio, meaning like a club, right? This basidium, and they're produced by sexual production usually, and so these are just usually our common mushrooms. So we didn't really look at any of these in lab too much, except for those like larger specimens. But then we have the chytrids, which are in Chytridiomycota, and so they weren't included in this chart that I found online, so I tried my best to try and include them. But they're not sometimes included as true fungi. They're called the imperfect fungi because they're only able to reproduce through asexual reproduction. And so we call their spores zoospores, right? And so this would be aspergillus. Okay. But yeah, I just want you to remember that we do have these 4 divisions that we usually classify our fungi in. Okay. And then just remembering that saprotrophic or saprophytic, however you want to say it, it's just free living and eating decaying matter, right? And so this is going to be kind of an outline for the true fungal pathogens that we're going to look at first, okay? And so we're going to look at histoplasma, blastomyces, coccidioides, paracoccidioides. Okay, and these occur basically everywhere. They're influenced by where they live, how they travel, and so we're gonna look at the different regions that these kind of occur in, and so just feel free to look back at this map as we go along while I'm talking. So yeah, let's get into it. Okay, so we're gonna begin with the Ohio Valley fever, also known as histoplasmosis. And so this is caused by our true pathogen, right? And then this is going to be in the phylum Ascomycota, okay? And so the pathogen's scientific name is Histoplasma capsulatum. Uh, Basically, histoplasmosis, uh, this illness, right? It's existed for as long as we have had agriculture, uh, in our human societies. Okay, it's just that mixing, okay, that has allowed for this disease to occur, and so histoplasmosis occurs in all continents except for Australia. So lucky them. Sad for us. But the reason it's called the Ohio Valley fever is just that the highest rate of incidence occurs in the eastern and central U.S., or the Ohio Valley. Okay. It grows in quite an abundance in moist soils that will have a high nitrogen content. And this high nitrogen content comes from bird and bat guano, right? And so this is where this is going to mostly cause this little fungi to thrive, right? And so it's in the soil, and it's thriving in its hyphal form in these different little feces, right? But then we inhale their conidia through the wind, and that can happen from, maybe there's a disruption in the soil, or the soil's getting kind of blown around in the wind, and so you can inhale it. And then once it's in the body, the infection can begin. And this one's insane because you just need as little as 5 spores for this infection to start. And so it typically, right, it'll grow in the cytoplasm of phagocytes and macrophages. Okay. Kind of going back to that morphology that allows it to kind of be able to grow on the body, right? On into our different cells. And so hosts, they can typically be asymptomatic, but they can also range to having full-on pulmonary infections, systemic infections, and even cutaneous lesions. Okay, so not good at all. And so symptoms, they can be anywhere from aches and pains and coughing, to a little bit more severe, to having fever, night sweats, and even weight loss, okay? And so more severe forms of histoplasmosis, this can occur in hosts that have, that bad immunity, that poor immunity. And this would be seen in, AIDS patients, or patients with HIV, or, any kind of uh, illness, pre-existing condition that has weakened their immune system, can cause this illness to be more virulent, okay? And so here's a nice little diagram just kind of explaining how it's all in there. So basically, right, soil or bat droppings, right? They'll be in the soil. They get whipped up by the wind, and we're inhaling those conidia, okay? And so this guy right here, it says he develops mild pneumonitis, right? And this could recur. It could be a recurring infection if they stay inside of his body, right? And so in the tissue phase of this infection, right? Once it's in us, it's a yeast. Let's remember that, right? And so the little yeast forms, they're phagocytized, and they're just going to multiply. and they're going to multiply, 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 and they're doing this by budding, right, within the phagocyte. And you can have patients just recover and be fine. Maybe they just felt like they had a cold kind of thing, not think twice about it. But in other cases, as we had discussed, right, the phagocytes, they could enter the blood, and they could carry these yeasts within them, and basically deliver them throughout different parts of the body, and so they can cause this disease to spread. And so this is just kind of a nice photo showing you what it would look like out in the open, right? So this is Histoplasma capsulatum in its hyphal stage, right? And so it says, typically it'll be 25 degrees Celsius, so 77 degrees Fahrenheit that it's at. And then over here, this is what it looks like when it's in the body in its yeast form. It's producing this creamy grossness right there, okay? And so, 37 degrees is the changing point for that, or, human body temperature. So 98.6 kind of is what we're looking at. And so when you're kind of scanning the body for these for this illness, this is typically what you'd see. This is a phagocyte, right? And it's completely infested with all these yeasts, and they say that it has a fish eye kind of appearance to it, but they'll all be clustered up and in this macrophage, okay? And so how do you find these in samples, right? You can take it from blood. You can take it from sputum, which is basically just mucus and saliva, so you can have them cough it up, and you can do a microscope view of that. And you can also even get cerebrospinal fluid to look at it. But yeah, basically, right, you can further detect it by maybe isolating the pathogen and then grow it in a lab setting. And then you can do tests to see this dimorphism, see it in its hyphal phase versus its yeast phase. And that's good and dandy, but it takes too long. And so if you're trying to help a patient ASAP, that's typically not what you're going to do, but you can do that. Maybe more in of a research setting and not a now treat me setting, okay? And so you can also measure the level of antibodies in blood, and we call this an antibody titer test, okay? However, if you have a positive test, it doesn't mean that you have a new infection. It could be from previous infections. So the best way to do it is by looking at actual samples from the patient, okay? Treatment, um, symptoms can be mild, usually, right? And so they can go away without really any medical treatment. Maybe you could use over-the-counter things to help you, but you're not going to be needing medical treatment for this. However, patients who experience real severe symptoms, because it's become a systemic infection, they'll need to undergo systemic chemotherapy. What a jump. It's just that bad once it completely takes over the body, okay? And so, for these patients where it is more severe, they're going to be taking this drug, and it's called amphotericin B. Okay, and we're going to see a lot of this, but basically it destroys the fungus's membranes, okay? And the way this is administered is it's intravenously, okay? There's no pills for this. It's got to be done intravenously along with that chemotherapy, okay? Pretty severe stuff. If it's really bad, another thing that can help improve the patient is by surgically removing masses of this yeast from the lungs. Okay. And so with that, let's go ahead and talk about the San Juan Valley fever. Okay. And so this is caused by coccidioides mycosis, right? And so It's just easier to say valley fever, guys. But it's caused by the true pathogen, which is, in the phylum Ascomycota. It's an Ascomycete. It's caused by this true pathogen, Coccidioides immitis. Okay, and that's a little picture of what it looks like. And this has existed in the soil for millions and millions of years, but it hasn't really interacted with animal species. Um, but now that humans are here, we're encountering them quite a bit, and that's just due to habitat encroachment. We're coming upon these guys, and so and I say this like this just happened yesterday, but I mean more of just like existence of human in general. Okay, and so at 25 degrees Celsius, okay, so like 77 degrees Fahrenheit, if you're having trouble picturing that. It's usually going to be a whitish to brown colony, still in the hyphal form, producing spores. But at 37 degrees to 40 degrees Celsius, right? So 98.6 to 104 Fahrenheit. They have these things called arthrospores, and those will germinate into a parasitic spherule. And it has different cyclic life cycles. So it can have different forms based on basically different seasons. But we're not going to focus too much on that for this course. What I want y'all to know is how it's passed, right? And so once again, we have that disruption of the soil. We're agitating it, and we're creating this aerosol, right? It's getting into the air. It's getting kicked up into the soil, and we get these little arthrospores, which is just what we call their little spores, right, from their fungi. And we inhale those arthrospores. And once that happens, it will establish a lung infection, okay? And so how that happens is that this arthrospore will basically develop over time, and it will produce what we call endospores, okay? And so those are ruptured and released into the lungs. Um, they produce these arthrospores, right? The arthrospores eventually produce this or develop into this thing we call a spherule, and that's just basically a giant sporangium, right? But it's inside, so we're calling it a spherule that produces these endospores that exist in your body. Okay, and so they can cause this infection, but once again, if you're a pretty healthy person, no pre-existing um ailments or anything like that, you're going to be fine. Return back to work as normal after you've fought the infection. However, compromised immune systems, people with them, they can develop really bad things such as meningitis, osteomyelitis, and even skin granulomas. Okay, so this is bad stuff, right? Um, this can become a systemic infection. Okay, and where does this occur? It occurs in semi-arid environments that are actually a little bit warmer, right? A relatively hot climate. And they flourish in areas that have soil with a high carbon salt content. So unlike the other one where we've got a lot of nitrogen and they're kind of in these cooler moisture habitats, over here, right, with coccidioides, right, we've got this this semi-arid environment. It's kind of warm, and it's kind of odd for fungi, but this is what this guy likes, okay? Um, and so we have the highest incidence, right, in the southwestern U.S. So this is going to be southern Arizona and the San Joaquin Valley of California, and where there's a lot there, and so we call these areas reservoirs, okay? But yeah, that's why it's called the San Joaquin Valley fever, Valley fever for short. But it's because it occurs in that area, that southwestern area. Okay, and it's gonna actually extend into Mexico and Central America, where they have these kinds of environments for this fungi to thrive. But outbreaks are usually associated in areas where there's a lot of farming activity going on, archaeological digging, and even dust storms. And so I believe, right, that we say that a way you can prevent this is by, kind of growing some more plant vegetation. This might be able to help that, okay? Um, but yeah, um, they get into our body just because they're so lightweight, right? Super easy to inhale, and this one's crazy because you only need one spore to cause an infection, okay? And like we had said, right, those arthrospores become a spherule, which is basically just a giant sporangium, right? And then it releases those endospores into our lungs. And so it can keep repeating that cycle. And so 60% of hosts show little to no symptoms of infection, but they still are infected, right? Because this is a true pathogen. But 40% of the hosts exhibit cold-like symptoms, which would be fever, chest pain, cough, headache, and malaise. And malaise is just a fancy word for general discomfort or just generally feeling bad. Okay. Um, while some may not outright show obvious symptoms, and I'm just kind of drilling this into y'all's head. Uh, basically, all people who inhale this arthrospore develop some type of infection. And so people with weakened immune systems, uh, they can develop chronic pulmonary disease. Okay. And this is basically a chronic inflammatory lung disease, and it obstructs airflow from the lungs. Okay, once you have this, it's really hard to breathe, and so you can tell it's there by these nodule growths, which we call fungomasses, right? And they can form cavities in the lungs. And so this is your warning right now, okay? We're going to be seeing some gross photos um, in this course, but please get used to it because, this is biology. We got to learn this stuff, okay? So please proceed with caution. Um, let's get into it. You've been warned. I'm sorry, guys. You got to look at these. Okay. And so these are those nodular growths, right? These are those fungal masses, right? They're causing those right over here inside the lungs, right? They're causing these different areas. But also they're causing these cutaneous lesions. You can see it outside if someone has this coccidiomycosis. Okay. And this is a really poor quality photo, and I apologize for that, but I would like to show how, first, day they go to the hospital feeling not so good, and they take an x-ray, see nothing. Day 5, look at all of those fungal masses. Insane how quickly they can just proliferate, okay? And so in 7% of cases, we can have it become systemic. And that, as we had said previously, only happens with weakened immune systems, people with genetic predispositions, and then even people who are in particular places. And so your book says that certain ethnic groups can be affected. They didn't really get into detail with that. So I found this paper, right, by Brown et al. In the Journal of Clinical Epidemiology. I've posted a link. You can feel free to look at that if you so wish. But basically, people of African, Filipino, Asian, or Hispanic descent tend to develop these systemic infections, and they're a little bit more likely to have these. Okay, people with diabetes. Okay, and then if we kind of use our little higher thinking skills here, right? Typically Hispanic and African people, right? We have uh this also predisposition to have diabetes. So unfortunately, we've got a bit of a double whammy here. Sorry guys. But also pregnant women, you know, they're having a weaker immune system because their body's focused a little bit more on other things at the moment, right? And then we have elderly patients, transplant recipients, they're still trying to, get their body adjusted to their new new um new organ. And so people with HIV or AIDS, or people who are undergoing cancer treatment. And then I thought this article was really interesting because it said that it's also been described in quite a bit of prison systems. Um, and that's just that the valley fever, or the coccidioidio, um, basically has a reservoir in different prisons for whatever reason. It's a really good like climate for them for some reason, a good environment, and so we have a lot of prisoners who get infected, which is kind of wild, but that's a thing. And so, how do we detect this? So super easy to detect if you see um the spherules, right? If you see those large sporangiums, right? Uh in in the sputum, which as we had said, is coughed up by the patient. You can see it in that spinal fluid, and then you can see it in biopsies, right? Which are little it's tissue you can take from the patient, right? And can also once again isolate it to view, mycelia versus like yeasts, looking at it on augers and different temperature environments. However, if you do this, you have to grow them all in a tube. And if you open these to do tests, it has to be under a containment tube. That's how um, can that's how infectious these little guys are. It's just one spore. So we kind of don't want to do that. Let's just do this easily by looking at specimen samples. And so uh if you do get a very very bad um disease, you can basically just get the amphotericin B treatment. It's disturbing those fungal cell walls, right? And it'll be administered intravenously, right? You can also take azole drugs, but this is done over a long period of time. So if it's serious, but also not in a dire state, you can take azole drugs if you have the time for it. Same with the previous Ohio Valley fever. You can take azole drugs, but these take a while. It's slowly killing the fungi. So you need the time. And if you don't have that, then amphotericin B is what you're going to be using. Another way you can kind of help to uh, reduce the spread of this fungi is that can oil down roads. And those can be oiled down to basically prevent the kicking up of these spores into the air, and becoming aerosol. And also planting more plants. Okay, that's basic environmental stuff. You don't want uh wind erosion occurring it's better for the environment if you just have those roots holding the soil down. Okay. And now we're going to get into North American blastomycosis. Okay. Once again, it's a true fungal pathogen. It's caused by blastomyces dermatitis, right? Dermatitis. Okay. A little bit of a mouthful, but we'll get through it. They're also ascomycetes in the phylum Ascomycota. And we call it North American blastomycosis, but it's also known as the Gichrist disease or the Chicago disease. Okay, and so hypho form, basically just white to tan. They do have those septate myceliums, but it's an ascomycete. We expected that. And they have very simple uh ovoid conidia with them. Okay. Or yeah. And so these yeasts, they're pretty large, super super large, and they've got a very heavy wall, and so when they're in the body, they form these colonies that are kind of creamy white and gross. Okay. And so this is looking at our guys, right? And so here's our blastomyces, and we have this filamental form that will eventually release the conidia. Okay. I think it's cute. It says it resembles tiny lollipops. It does look like that. And then you can basically do a fluorescent staining to kind of see them in different tissues, and these are them in the lungs, and you can note how large they are. I wish they had a scale bar on this; it would be more helpful. But they've got that very thick wall. Okay, where do you find these guys? Okay, so they're going to be found in rich organic matter. We're going to be finding them in forests, right? They're going to be in the soil. They're going to be feeding on detritus, decaying wood, and animal manure, okay? And so they have this life cycle, which again I said, where I'm not going to be testing you over their life cycles, but it's fun to know. They're basically they'll be dormant for a little while during the drier times, the hotter times. But then they start growing and producing spores during colder and wetter seasons. That's where it thrives. And so you'll see more of this occurring in these wetter seasons, okay? But they mainly occur from southern Canada to all the way to southern Louisiana, and also from Minnesota to Georgia, right? And so this is why it's called the North American blastomycosis, okay? And so this can be acquired by inhaling the conidia through the dust, as we've seen, right? You're agitating the soil, you're kicking it up, and then you inhale it. It's no. But it can infect humans. It can also affect dogs, cats, and horses. So that's kind of sad. Not so great. It's okay if it's just us, but you can't be doing the dogs and the cats and the horses. Come on now. But anyways, once again, you only need a small dose of these true pathogens. For these guys, a little more than what we've seen previously, but you gotta think these spores are small, and so you can just need anywhere from 10 to all the way to 100. But like I said, these are small, right? And these can stimulate an infection, and so we can have these different pulmonary symptoms that would be things like a cough, a chest pain, hoarseness of the throat, and even fever. Okay, but more severe symptoms, once again, can result in a very chronic illness. Okay, for over here, we can have lung abscesses and tumor-like nodules, and sometimes this can be basically mistaken for cancer in some patients, and so it's not treated correctly initially sometimes. Okay. Um, so it begins as just a little nodule on a face, on the face or the hands, right? That's how the infection begins. You'll start to notice these small little nodules. However, it can progress to the lungs. It can progress to the skin, right? Because it initially gets in through the lungs, and then it can progress out into the skin, and that's how we notice these nodules, right? And so basically, 20% of the people who get it have these systemic infections. It's very sad. This can include, skin, bones, and the prostate, and very rarely, but it does occur, the central nervous system. Okay, and then you can have death in up to 5% of the cases. So, for those weak of stomach, please put down your snacks. We're about to look at some more gross photos. So this is your warning. No more warnings after this, okay? These are pretty gross. Okay, so these are those nodules we were talking about, right? And so they produce what we call the cutaneous blastomycosis, right? It's in that skin layer. And usually you'll see them on the face, neck, and hands, and what's typical of identifying these as this blastomycosis is that we have this purple ring around the tissue on the patients, but then you have, right, this this black plaque that forms around it. And so just this is what's typical of these infections. So move on from this. How do you diagnose this? Once again, you can be looking at a sample under the microscope, same as before, sputum. You can be looking at blood. You can be looking at all these different types of things, and they'll be showing the very, very large yeast cells and the yeast buds with those thick cell walls. And once again, you can isolate it and grow it in the lab, but if you're trying to do this quickly, we're not going to be doing that. And so, to treat this, for those with a disseminated mycosis, which disseminate is just another word for systemic, it's traveling throughout the body. Once again, we're using that amphotericin B intravenously. And then milder cases, right, if you have the time for it, you'll be using that azole drug over a longer period of time. And with that, we go from North American to South American, okay? And so this one is caused by Paracoccidioides brasiliensis. So it's kind of geographic name here. We've got this occurring more in the South Americas, right? We can also call this sickness paracoccidioideal mycosis, paracoccidioideal granuloma. But let's just call it South American blastomycosis for the sake of brevity, okay? And it has a very restricted distribution because it only occurs in these kind of tropical, semi-tropical regions of South and Central America. It's one of the rarest mycoses to occur because it's really only in those areas. And so examples of countries where that's at, we'd have Brazil, Colombia, Venezuela, Argentina, and Paraguay. So, this typically occurs in people who work in agriculture and harvesting plants, okay? And so, drilling this into y'all, but the influence, right, of how virulent this pathogen can be, can be things such as poor nutrition, and then once again that impaired or weakened immune resistance, I guess, of the host, how well their immune system is. And so most of the time it's not really harmful, as we had seen. And so basically little to no symptoms. It's still causing that infection, but it can be very mild. However, in a minority of people, the pathogen can invade things more than just the lungs. We can have them invade the skin or the mucous membranes, especially in the heads, and then even lymphatic organs. So it's really bad. And so this one was a little more short, but we don't want these true pathogens to become systemic because they're harder to treat and they become very severe once they are systemic, okay? And so now we're going to go ahead and get into basically some cutaneous mycoses. And so what do we call that? Well, we can also call this dermatophytosis, right? And so these are mycoses that are at the superficial layer, right, of the skin. So we have things like athlete's foot and ringworm that are associated with different fungi. And so they have an affinity for skin, hair, nails. This is where they thrive. And so once again, if we're looking at these layers, right, the cutaneous and the superficial layers of the skin, this is going to be more of just like contact with different surfaces of contaminated surfaces. And that's how you'll get these. And so of that, right, we can have what we call ringworm occur. Okay, and medical term for ringworm is just tinea. Okay, but basically, right, it's superficial, right? It's on that outer layer of skin, and it's caused by different types of dermatophytes. Okay, different types of fungi that feast on skin, hair, and nails. And so don't think that ringworm is caused by one particular species. That's why it says common name is a misnomer, because it's just a general term for this um infection from a fungi that you see that causes a ring around the skin. Okay? And here are the different fungi species that can cause more specific forms of ringworm. I'm not going to have you memorize these. I just want you to know that they exist, okay? And so, you know, these trichophyton, you can basically um, easily identify because it's only going to be on the hair, skin, and nails. And this is from human to human contact, right? Um, and then it can also be from animal to human. So be careful when you are picking up strays. Um, I've known people to get stray cats and they get ringworm from them because the little kitten was, you know, previously infected. So always be sure to, like, you know, thoroughly wash your hands, guys. It is treatable. It's just something to look out for, you know. Poor little fella's kind of infested. Then we have microsporum, okay? And so this will be only on the scalp hair, um, you know, on the scalp. And then it'll be on the skin too. You won't see this in the nails. And so this can be from animal to human once again. It can even be from just the soil to human, and then human to human, okay? Then we have epidermophyton, and so this is one that you can get on the groin and the nails, and so you're seeing this in those different genitalia areas, you know, the groin area, and this one only happens from human to human. Okay, so if your partner has a little bit of a ringworm down there, don't be messing down there, okay? Until that's all cleared up because you can get it too. And these are just different examples of them under the scope, okay? And this is what you typically look for these different ringworm causing little pathogens here. Okay, and so I'm sorry guys, but you know, we gotta get used to this. We've got some more gross photos coming up. Luckily they're gonna be pretty brief as I go over these. So here's just some ringworm that could be found on the head, and then this one, all right, the fasciae, right? This we typically call it the beard the beard ringworm, but that one kind of gets around the face. This one's on the head. Pretty nasty fellas, but they do cause that typical ring pattern. But here are the different places you can get them in, right? Um, we have all of these on here. I like that it says no image due to sensitive nature. Thanks. We don't want to see that particularly, but you know, feel free to do what you want to do in your free time. Um, I'm not gonna have y'all look at those. So how do you diagnose this? It's usually visually obvious, and you don't need to do any testing. You can also get scrapings and do a microscope view of it. You know, take a microscopic examination. You can isolate it in a culture, but typically for ones of the head, it's super easy to see using a special light called a wood light, and it releases a type of UV light, and you can visibly see it in the roots of the hair and on the scalp. And so best treatment is time. You know, these guys only exist, you know, in your in the layer of like living skin. So as your skin is dying and you're washing your hands, you're getting, you know, new layers of skin. This guy's gonna eventually go away. But there are topical ointments. You can also take oral drugs for this. I know people with uh slightly weakened immune systems or slower immune systems due to like diabetes, if they get something like athlete's feet, typically doctors will prescribe them oral medications that will help to kind of dry out the area. And then we also have UV light treatments that help to dry out the area. And so um, now that we're done with the true pathogens, and now that we're done with the cutaneous mycoses, we're gonna go ahead and look at two different opportunistic fungi, right? And so one is Candida, right? And this is in its yeast form. And then we have Aspergillus, which is the mold, right? And so Candida albicans is the scientific name for this little yeast, right? And 20% of humans actually carry this within their pharynx, their genitalia, and even inside their large intestines or on their skin. And so this is an opportunistic guy. So you can have this on or within your body. And you'd never know because, basically your immune system's taking care of it for you. But once again, if it slips past due to your weakened immune system or something like that, it can cause thrush mouth and yeast infections. I've saved you a bit of pain of looking at images from that, so no need to thank me, but you don't have. I'm not showing that for this PowerPoint. And so we also have Aspergillus. Okay, and so this one happens to be the most pervasive of all fungi. It's all around, and most recently, it's posing a pretty great threat to people who have AIDS or HIV, leukemia patients, and immunodeficient patients. Okay. Um, and this one, it says it's most pervasive because it's causing a lot of different little infections, but it can also be involved in allergies and toxicosis. Okay? Um, but they can just occur from breathing in these canidia from things such as granaries, barns, and silos. Um, so more of like a farm type setting. Okay? In healthy people, we have these long exposure to the canidia that'll eventually develop these fungus balls in the lungs, and that's about as bad as it gets if you are consistently in these kinds of environments where you're exposed to them for a long time. In more serious cases, we have systemic infections all the way to the brain, the heart, the skin, and these can cause necrotic pneumonia, so really bad. And so moving on, we're going to talk about allergies and intoxications. And so spores from fungi can cause fungal allergies. You can get things like seasonal asthma. I get seasonal asthma, and that's just because, my body's reacting to these different, seasonal fungi that are causing my body to have these allergic reactions, in my respiratory system. Some of you might experience this. Even just in, I think it was high school, there was a particular part of the building that I just felt like I couldn't breathe. But yeah, they had some weird. It was a very old building, so there was definitely molds growing up in that entire building. It was gross. But yes, I was getting this kind of weird, almost seasonal asthma type thing there. But anybody can experience these. They're very prevalent throughout the world. And we can even have things such as mycotoxicosis, right? And so this can be, getting an illness from ingesting a poisonous fungi. Okay? And so we can even have these things such as aflatoxins. And so, once again from Aspergillus, right? Specifically the species Aspergillus flavus can produce a toxin that can poison moldy or that can poison animal feed, right? Uh, it, it it's producing this aflatoxin, and it can cause liver cancer in humans and in other animals, right? If we're getting this poison ingested into us. So that's it, guys. Um, please follow along with your review. Mainly look at what I have in these PowerPoints. The textbook is your aid. Okay, if you want to get further in and more detail, they're really good for definitions and understanding things a little better if you're having trouble. But yeah, just follow along with the PowerPoints and the study guide, and hopefully this will get you nice and prepared for your test. And once again, I'm letting you use your notes for your exam, so take good notes. Make sure you understand the material, okay?